how do you feel about interpretation?
You know, it's been going on back in these days, and it goes on in these days.
But I'm doing it, it's fine.
Right.
For
As long as
whatever I
everybody
interpret,
agrees with me,
yeah.
it's fine.
Right. And that's, I mean, what's the standard?
Right.
And oftentimes we use a particular standard for understanding and reading scripture. And what I'm suggesting is that for black women, they read it in a particular way that is different than the standard way of reading it, taking into consideration those indices, those entities that oftentimes we forget to look at. Do we look at, when you talked about Ruth, and we're going to get into Ruth now. When you talked about Ruth, did you read it from that of race and class? Do you have?
We
Okay.
did it a little bit in one of the first lessons. Yes,
Okay.
between the daughters-in-law who were Moabites and Ruth, who was an Israelite, and
Okay.
what that meant.
Okay. So tell me more about what that meant.
Well, I mean, it depends on whose perspective. I want to get back to about interpretation.
Yes,
The
Mr.
point I
Urson.
want to make. Interpretation is about perspective. And I think the Bible is written, the Old Testament and the New Testament are written by perspectives of the times.
Yes.
And we need to, to write a story like this about slaves and that kind of thing in a time where it was a patriarchal society and there were slaves and so forth, was relevant to the people who would have heard it at the time. To us, it sounds way out of touch and wrong. And it doesn't mean it wasn't wrong then, but it does mean it was relevant then. Just like examples in the New Testament about, the shepherd looking for the lost sheep. None of us herd sheep. I mean,
Right.
What does herding sheep have to do with us? But there is a message there to people who are in
Absolutely.
the sheep herding society.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
I think there's relevance that has to be read into how things
Exactly.
are interpreted.
You're right. And for African American women, the relevance of this, and that's the reason why I pointed out, okay, sending her back into what is perceived as an abusive relationship, situation. The relevance is that God is there, God has still a promise. There is hope. And so that's what we gather from that piece. It's not the comparison between who was right, Sarah or Hagar, or even Abraham. I'm looking at a male over here. But where is God in this? And for African American women in situations when they read it and see, their situation similarly to women of this era, not the same, but similarly, there's a look for hope and God's promise. God is there even when I'm still in this horrible situation, when there's people who are saying that I shouldn't be uppity, and shouldn't feel the way that I feel, and I'm cast away into the wilderness. I have a child that I need to take care of. I'm a single mom, and the mom's daddy is nowhere, really not caring for this child. Where is the hope? And for African American women, the hope is that God still hears the cries. God heard the cry of Ishmael. God is there, and God is going to continue. And God has a promise, that things are going to get better.
But you also have to be careful that it's not interpreted as God says, always go back to the bad situation.
No,
because there's hope.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what
But there's also the issue of trusting in what God is telling you to do, even though it doesn't maybe feel like or sound like the right thing at that given moment. It's having that trust to take that next step, even though it feels.
But even the blessing doesn't sound like a blessing. It's like, oh, good news, you're going to give birth to a child, but he's going to have it really rough.
He's going to be an ass.
Yeah, it's like, and he's going to be against his kin. It's like there's all this negative stuff that you're thinking, and I'm curious how the womanist perspective perceives that. Is that
Life's going to be rough.
And we say that life is rough. Life is rough for our male children. And so what do we do with this? Not to say that the promise is he's going to always be that way. Hopefully, there's salvation and redemption for our children. That's what we're taking from that. But yeah, it's a rough text.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really rough text. And so, what would a woman on Moreland Avenue who's not had theological training and hears this text, what is she going to do with this? How do you preach this? How do you teach this? It's hard, unless you can find something that's redemptive out of this. And again, it's the hope that God hears your cry even when you're in the wilderness, And so, yes, somebody's going to call you uppity and, say you have no right to speak your voice or have the opinion or your emotions. But, God is there. And so that's the message that I try to preach and teach.
Isn't that what kept the slaves going so much in this country? The black church.
Right.
Held them together and gave them a hope and
Yes.
everything. And so it's probably a different way than the white church.
Right.
To some degree.
Right. And also what the black church did not do is take into consideration, the woman's perspective,
But the white church didn't either.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that, but my critique, being a woman, I can critique the black church too. It's like, what have you not done, And you've not taken that into consideration. And so I'm hoping that both the black church and the white church will look at Scripture differently, where they will take into consideration the voices of women, the voices of persons of color as you interpret the Scripture, and even look at the issues of classism. So again, here there's this. What do you do with this piece of glass? Do we say that's the way it's supposed to be? No.
And two, I think sometimes that, and I speak for myself in this, I think a lot of people sit and wait. God promised me this. I'm waiting, I'm going to sit right here and wait, instead of getting up and looking, going out and about and trying to find it.
Right.
They forget that there's guidance in this whole equation.
Exactly.
And it's a two-way deal. You have to take part of it.
Exactly.
Be a part of it.
And a womanist way of thinking is that there is action, there is movement. You do something, So it's not just waiting, for, the blessings to come down, and, there is an action piece to that. And that's where the womanist, theologians have moved theology into social justice, issues of social justice, looking at ethics, why is it that we do what we do, the whole gamut. So it's not that stagnant, just wait and,
Or just accept it as it is.
or accept it
Yes.
as it is.
That's
So-
the same.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So, how would womenist theologian, queer theologian, is very okay with yelling and screaming at God? Are wominists very okay with yelling and screaming at God? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that. Okay,
Yeah.
We get pissed off too.
Oh.
but compare that to Western Christian viewpoints. It's very nice and polite, and I don't understand God, but God has something coming for me.
Well, my wonderment is, have we given Western culture the permission to be angry? Or women in Western culture, the okay to say
Then
it's...
we become uppity.
Yes. Exactly.
Might be a subject for another time or discussion. It would be interesting to hear what the woman on the Cherokee Reservation would say about that.
Same.
First Nation,
Second.
First Nation theologian.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome.
that would be good.
I had a great grandmother who was a Native American. She
Would identify.
caustic a lot of things. So,
Yeah, and there's a growing number of American Indian women's voices that are coming up that's interpreting Scripture in a way that is their own. Latinos, Mujerista, theologians, they do the same thing. African theologians, they have their own way of understanding. Everyone has their own way. Well, the problem has been that those theological perspectives have not necessarily been honored or lifted up. I mean, for example, this is the first time you're hearing about womanist theology. Well, it's been around a very long time, since I was in seminary back in 93, 94. What time are we in, like now?
You got a clip?
Yes. So I'll just,
We have to get you back.
Sure, okay, because we didn't even touch on Ruth, you know.
Can we come, can you come?
And this is perfect that we didn't touch on Ruth, because we now have, our appetite has been whetted. A new way that we will be listening to those presentations, and we need to bring what we're learning here,
Yes.
which
that's
is
what I
a
was
lot
gonna
about
suggest.
questioning.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Will you come back?
Since I have no job, I have plenty of time.
There's always a blessing.
Yes,
There you go. There you go.
Just a little cleanup stuff. If you borrowed one of the notepads, just take your paper out, put it in the pile over there. Same with the pens. Next week we will have Peter White with the Southern Center to talk about world affairs. And then after that we will continue our Uppity Women of the Bible with Ruth. So if you haven't had a chance to read Ruth yet, do a cursory glance at it. Just go through,
back for Ruth.
get your ideas.
Come back for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There's a book, I've heard, I haven't read it, that was called 1,000 White Women, that apparently is about,
I put mine down.
an exchange. There was some thing of, well, if you do this, then you have to, it was with the Indian nation. You know, if you want us to accept this,